I didn't join a book club looking for love. That would be absurd. It would be like in a hardware store for a gallon of milk. I went because my silence was starting to echo, because the four walls of my apartment had memorized the rhythm of my breathing and were beginning to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a cell. I wanted intelligent conversation. I wanted to talk about themes and character arcs. I wanted a reason to put on a clean shirt on a Tuesday night. My life was a carefully curated collection of quiet routines. The precise ritual of my morning coffee, the specific route I walked to the library where I worked, the ordered silence of the archives where I spent my days preserving the stories of others. It was a good life, a safe life, a life where the only heart I had to worry about breaking was a spine on a brittle, century-old first edition. Then came Julian. He was there at the first meeting, a loud and sudden disruption to the otherwise muted atmosphere of our host's living room. He was big, not just tall but broad, taking up space in a way that felt like an announcement. He sat sprawled in an armchair that seemed 2 sizes too small for him, a worn paperback bent back in one large hand. He looked less like a literary enthusiast and more like a man who had wandered in after chopping down a forest. His voice was a low rumble that filled the room, swallowing the more hesitant opinions of the other members. He disagreed with everything I loved about the month's selection. He called the protagonist whiny, the prose self-indulgent. Each word felt like a personal critique, a direct assault on my own quiet, internal world. I saw him as an antagonist from a poorly written novel. Arrogant, brash, all physical presence and no nuance. I decided, with the swift and silent judgment of a lifelong observer, that I disliked him immensely. The distance between us was a chasm. He was loud, I was quiet. He was all confident pronouncements. I was hesitant, carefully worded observations. When I finally summoned the courage to speak, defending a passage I found particularly beautiful, he turned his full attention on me. His eyes, a surprisingly clear and piercing shade of blue, pinned me to my seat. He did not look away. He did not blink. "Beauty is easy," he'd said, his voice dropping a register, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. "Honesty is hard." The author chose pretty words over telling the truth. My own words dried up, turning to dust in my throat. I felt my face flush, a hot tide of humiliation. He had dismissed me and my entire worldview in 2 short sentences. I shrank back into my chair, making a silent vow to simply listen for the rest of the evening, and perhaps for the rest of my tenure in this club. He was a force of nature I had no desire to contend with. He was a storm, and I was a house made of dry paper. For the next 2 meetings, this was our dynamic. A planet and a distant, hostile star. I orbited from a safe distance, making my small, quiet points only when he was distracted by a trip to the kitchen for another beer. I watched him, of course. It was impossible not to. He was a gravitational pull in any room he occupied. I cataloged his mannerisms. The way he ran a hand through his thick, dark hair when frustrated, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the impatient tap of his fingers against his thigh. These were detached observations. Data points. I was an archivist of human behavior, and he was a particularly loud and perplexing specimen. Nothing more. That is what I told myself. A lie, of course, but a comfortable one. A necessary one, because admitting any sort of fascination felt like a betrayal of my own quiet nature, an invitation for chaos I was not equipped to handle. My life was built on the foundation of avoiding men like Julian. Then came the 3rd Tuesday in November. The forecast had mentioned a dusting of snow, a quaint, festive touch for the upcoming holidays. The weather, as it often does, had more dramatic plans. It started halfway through our discussion of a dense historical fiction novel. Fat, wet flakes began to cling to the windows, blurring the streetlights in a hazy, golden orbs. At first, it was beautiful. We commented on it, a pleasant distraction from a particularly slow chapter. An hour later, the beauty had turned menacing. The wind howled, a mournful sound that rattled the old window panes. The world outside our host's cozy living room had vanished into a swirling vortex of white. Someone checked their phone. The news was stark. A flash blizzard. A freak storm. The roads were already impassable. The city was shutting down. We were, all 8 of us, stranded. A wave of anxious energy filled the room. Phone calls were made. Plans were canceled. Our host, a generous woman named Clara, assured us there was plenty of room, plenty of wine, and a well-stocked pantry. It would be an adventure, she'd said, a story to tell. A book club sleepover. My heart, that frantic bird, began to beat against the cage of my ribs. An unscheduled event. A disruption of the highest order. My carefully constructed routine was not just bent but shattered. I felt a familiar prickle of panic, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the storm outside. It was the dread of unpredictability, the dread of forced intimacy with near strangers. And with him, the logistics were sorted out with a kind of chaotic diplomacy. Clara had a master bedroom. There were 2 guest rooms, one with a queen bed, one with 2 twins. A large, comfortable sofa in the living room. 2 married couples claimed the guest rooms immediately. A woman named Sarah happily took the sofa. That left me. And him, Julian. Clara wrung her hands, her face a mask of apology. "There's the study," she said, her voice strained. "It's small, but there's a daybed, and we have an air mattress. It's not ideal, but it's warm." The room went quiet. All eyes turned to us, the 2 remaining single men, the mismatched pair, the polar opposites. The silence was a physical weight pressing down on me. My mind raced, searching for an escape hatch. I could sleep in a chair. I could sleep on the floor. I could feign a sudden illness that required absolute isolation. But Julian spoke before I could. "That's fine," he said, his voice calm and decisive, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He looked at me, a quick, unreadable glance. We'll manage. The words seal my fate. I was to be trapped, not just in this house, but in a small room with the one person who made my nerves feel like exposed wires. The one person who represented everything I was not. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest churning inside my own chest. The adventure was about to begin, and I was utterly, terrifyingly unprepared. The study was even smaller than Clara's description had suggested. It was lined wall to wall with books, a claustrophobic's nightmare and a bibliophile's dream. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and leather. A single window looked out into the white chaos of the storm. A narrow daybed was pushed against one wall, and a deflated air mattress lay in a box on the floor. Julian moved with an unnerving efficiency, pulling the mattress from its box and finding the built-in pump. The loud, mechanical whir filled the suffocating silence between us. I stood awkwardly by the door, clutching the pillow and blanket Clara had given me, feeling like an intruder in a scene where I was supposed to be a participant. "You can take the bed," he said over the noise of the pump, not looking at me. It was a statement, not an offer. "No, I can take the mattress, it's fine," I stammered, the words tumbling out too quickly. He finally stopped the pump and looked up at me. The room was suddenly, shockingly quiet. "You're smaller," he said. A simple fact, but the way he said it, the way his gaze swept over me for a fraction of a second, made it feel like an assessment, a judgment. I felt myself shrink under his stare. "I don't mind the floor," I insisted, my voice barely a whisper. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Don't be a martyr. Take the bed." He turned back to the mattress, and the conversation was over. The power dynamic was as it always was. He decided, and I complied. I placed my pillow on the daybed, the springs groaning in protest. We prepared for sleep in a tense, unspoken choreography. They left the room to change in the downstairs bathroom, and I quickly shed my jeans and sweater, pulling on the soft t-shirt and flannel pants I'd had the foresight to pack in my car for emergencies. My anxiety, it seemed, was occasionally useful. When he returned, he was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and dark sweatpants. The shirt stretched taut across his chest and shoulders. I saw the clear, defined lines of muscle in his arms, the strong column of his neck. My detached, archival observations were failing me. This was not data. This was a presence. A very large, very male presence in a very small room. I quickly got under the covers on the daybed, turning my back to him, facing the wall of books. I squeezed my eyes shut, feigning an exhaustion I did not feel. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I could hear him moving around, the soft thud of his bag on the floor, the rustle of fabric. Then, the sigh of the air mattress as he lay down. The room plunged into darkness as he switched off the single desk lamp. Darkness, but not silence. The storm raged outside, a constant, howling companion. And inside the room, there was a new sound. The sound of his breathing. Slow, deep, steady. It was an impossibly intimate sound. I tried to regulate my own breathing, convinced he could hear the frantic, shallow gasps I was taking. Sleep felt like a distant country I had no visa for. I lay there, rigid, listening to the storm and to the man sleeping less than 6 feet away from me. My mind, a relentless engine, began to work. It replayed our every interaction. His dismissive comment about the book. His intense, unblinking stare. The way he'd taken charge of his sleeping arrangements. He was exactly who I thought he was. Overbearing. Arrogant. So why was my body humming with a strange, unfamiliar energy? Why was I acutely aware of the warmth radiating from the other side of the room? Why did I have the absurd, insane urge to turn over and just look at him? I fought the impulse for what felt like hours. I counted sheep. I recited the Dewey Decimal System. I tried to transport myself back to the quiet safety of my own apartment. But I was here, in this room, with him. Eventually, curiosity, or perhaps some deeper, unacknowledged loneliness, won the battle. I turned over slowly, carefully, my movements measured to be silent. In the faint, bluish light filtering through the window from the snow-covered world outside, I could see his form on the mattress. He was on his back, one arm flung over his head. His face was turned towards me. In sleep, the hard lines of his face were softened. The arrogance was gone. The intimidating confidence had melted away, replaced by something vulnerable. I let my eyes adjust. I saw things I hadn't noticed in the bright, public space of the living room. A faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The dark stubble that shadowed his strong jaw. The way his thick eyelashes rested against his skin. He looked younger. He looked tired. My perception of him began to shift, to fray at the edges. The solid, two-dimensional character I had created in my mind was becoming complicated, three-dimensional. The antagonist was showing signs of a backstory, and it unsettled me. It was easier to dislike the loud, confident man in the armchair. It was much, much harder to feel anything but a strange, confusing pull towards the sleeping man on the floor. I watched him for a long time, my own exhaustion forgotten. I watched him until the rhythm of his breathing became a strange sort of lullaby. I watched him until my own eyelids grew heavy. And as I finally drifted off, my last conscious thought was a question that I was terrified to answer. What if I had been wrong about him? The world was still and silent when I woke. The storm had passed, leaving behind a thick blanket of white that muffled all sound. A pale, ethereal light filled the room. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I heard it, the soft, steady sound of breathing. I turned my head. Julian was still asleep. Sometime in the night, he had rolled onto his side, facing me. The blanket had slipped down, pooling around his waist. The gray t-shirt had ridden up, exposing a strip of skin and the sharp line of his hip. My own breath hitched. I lay there, unmoving, my gaze tracing the contours of his body in the dim morning light. I saw the subtle flex and release of the muscles in his back with each breath. I saw the calluses on the hand that was resting near his face, the knuckles slightly scarred. These were not the hands of a man who only held books. These were the hands of a man who worked, who built, who did things. A wave of something hot and unfamiliar washed over me. A dangerous curiosity. I wanted to know the story of that scar above his eye. I wanted to know how his hands had become so worn. I wanted to know the man, not the caricature I had constructed. My blanket had also slipped in the night, and a draft was chilling my arm. I reached down to pull it up, my movements slow and clumsy with sleep. My fingers fumbled with the edge of the thick woolen throw. As I pulled it towards me, my hand brushed against his. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental contact. Skin against skin for less than a second. But it felt like a lightning strike. A jolt of pure electricity shot up my arm, seizing the breath in my lungs. His skin was warm, impossibly warm. The brief contact was a brand, searing itself into my memory. My heart, which had been beating in a slow, sleepy rhythm, exploded into a frantic, panicked gallop. I snatched my hand back as if I'd touched a live wire, my fingers tingling with the phantom sensation of his skin. My entire body went rigid. I squeezed my eyes shut, my mind screaming. He's going to wake up. He felt that. He's going to open his eyes and see you staring at him, and he's going to know. Know what? The question echoed in the sudden, panicked silence of my thoughts. Know that I was watching him sleep? Know that the accidental touch had sent my world tilting on its axis? Know that my carefully constructed dislike was a fragile facade, a lie I told myself to keep a terrifying, exhilarating truth at bay? I held my breath, waiting, listening, but his breathing remained deep and even. He hadn't stirred. The world hadn't ended. Slowly, I let the breath out, a shaky, silent exhalation. But the panic was replaced by something else. A low, humming current of awareness. My own skin felt hypersensitive. I could feel the rough texture of the blanket, the cool air on my face, the frantic pulse beating in my throat. And I was overwhelmingly, deafeningly aware of him, of the heat his body was putting out into the small room, of the space, now charged with a new and potent energy, between my bed and his mattress. That single, accidental touch had changed the geography of the room. It was no longer just a small space shared out of necessity. It was a crucible, and I felt like I was being melted down and reformed into someone I didn't recognize. Suddenly, a loud clank and a groan echoed from somewhere deep within the house, followed by an abrupt and total darkness. The pale morning light from the window was extinguished. The world went black. And then the power went out. The silence that followed was different, deeper, more absolute. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint electronic whine of appliances on standby, all gone. All that was left was the sound of her breathing. And this time it had changed. I heard him stir, a low grunt of confusion from the floor. What the hell? His voice was a rough, sleep-fogged rumble in the pitch black. The power's out, I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. The darkness was a strange comfort, a cloak. He couldn't see the flush on my face or the wide, panicked look in my eyes. Great, he muttered. I heard more rustling as he sat up. Just great. There was a new note in his voice. Not arrogance, not aggression. It sounded like anxiety. This was a territory I knew. Anxiety was my native language. It's probably just a transformer blowing in the storm, I said, my voice gaining a little more confidence. The whole neighborhood is probably out. I hate the dark, he said, and the admission was so quiet, so stark, it felt like a stone dropping into a deep well. It was a confession, a crack in the facade. The big, confident man who dominated every conversation was afraid of the dark. And in that moment, the entire dynamic between us flipped on its head. It's okay, I said, and the words felt true. I have a flashlight in my bag. I moved carefully, swinging my legs off the daybed, my feet finding the cold floor. I felt my way to my duffel bag, my fingers locating the familiar, heavy cylinder of my high-powered tactical flashlight. My friends always teased me for carrying it. Anxiously overprepared, they called me. Right now, I felt nothing but a profound sense of vindication. I clicked it on. A brilliant, clean beam of white light cut through the oppressive darkness, illuminating a small circle of the room. I aimed it at the floor, not wanting to blind him. I could see his feet, his legs, the rumpled shape of him sitting on the air mattress. Whoa, he said, his voice laced with genuine surprise. You came prepared always, I replied, a small, wry smile touching my lips. The circuit breaker might have just tripped. I can check it. If Clara knows where the panel is, I think it's in the basement, he said. He stood up, and for the first time, I was the one holding the light. I was the one with the solution. He was just a man, standing in the dark, looking to me for guidance. The feeling was heady. It was terrifying. We made our way out of the study and into the hallway. The rest of the house was stirring, confused voices calling out. My flashlight beam became a beacon. I felt Julian walking close behind me, his presence a warm weight at my back. It no longer felt intimidating. It felt grounding. Clara directed us to the basement door. The stairs were steep and wooden. I went first, sweeping the light across the damp stone walls and the shadowy shapes of stored furniture. Julian followed, his footsteps heavy on the old treads behind me. The air was cold, smelling of earth and time. The breaker box was on the far wall. I handed the flashlight to Julian. "Hold this for me? Keep it on the panel, right?" he said. His fingers brushed mine as he took the light. This time, the touch was expected. It was a simple, functional exchange. And yet, the spark was still there. A low, simmering heat that I was beginning to recognize. I ignored it, focusing on the task at hand. I scanned the rows of switches. One was clearly tripped. "Ah," I said, a little thrill of competence running through me. "Here we are." I flipped it. Nothing happened. I flipped it again. Still nothing. "It's not just the breaker," I murmured, my brow furrowing. "The whole line must be down, so we're stuck," Julian said from behind me. The beam of light in his hand wavered slightly. "No power. No heat. The house will stay warm for a while," I said, trying to project a calm I didn't entirely feel. "And we have the fireplace upstairs." I turned to face him. The flashlight was aimed at the floor between us, casting our shadows up onto the stone wall behind us, making them loom like giants. His face was half in shadow, half in the reflected glow. The anxiety was still there, etched in the tight set of his jaw. We stood there for a moment, in the cold, silent basement, wrapped in a bubble of light and darkness. The rest of the world, the other people in the house, felt miles away. It was just us, just the two of us in the quiet, earth-scented dark. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "For the light. It's just a flashlight," I said, shrugging, though my heart was doing a strange, hopeful little flutter. "No," he said, and he took a half-step closer. The space between us shrank. "Thank you," this time. It sounded like he meant it for more than just the light. We went back upstairs, champions of a failed mission. The house was cold, and the mood was grim. But something had shifted between Julian and me. A barrier had been breached. We were no longer antagonist and victim, star and distant planet. We were just two people, two men, sharing a small, dark space in a world that had temporarily ground to a halt, and that felt more dangerous, more thrilling than any animosity ever could. We spent the day huddled in the living room, a small tribe of castaways gathered around the weak but welcome warmth of the fireplace. Conversation was sporadic, fueled by dwindling phone batteries and growing boredom. I found myself watching Julian again, but my observations were different now. I wasn't just cataloging his flaws. I was seeing him. I saw the way he helped Clara carry firewood from the porch, not waiting to be asked. I saw him give his own thick sweater to Sarah when she complained of the cold. I saw him quietly reading in a corner, his face a mask of intense concentration, the arrogant debater replaced by a solitary scholar. He caught me watching him once. I was sitting on the hearth, trying to coax some warmth back into my fingers. He was across the room, and his blue eyes met mine over the top of his book. I expected him to look away, or to give me that challenging, dismissive stare. He did neither. He held my gaze for a long moment, and then a small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. My stomach did a slow, dizzying flip. I looked away quickly, my face burning, and stared into the flames, my heart hammering against my ribs. The fire was doing nothing to warm me, but my entire body felt like it was alight. As evening fell, a new kind of intimacy settled over the house. The darkness pressed in at the windows, making our small circle of firelight feel like the only inhabited place in the universe. We ate a strange dinner of canned soup and crackers by candlelight. The flickering light softened everyone's features, erased the hard edges of the day. After dinner, people started to drift off, retreating to their cold rooms to huddle under blankets. Soon, it was just Julian and me left by the fire. The logs crackled and popped, a cozy, domestic sound in the vast silence. "You were right about that book," he said suddenly, his voice startling me out of my reverie. I looked at him. He was staring into the fire, his profile sharp and clear in the orange glow. "What? The one from the first meeting? The one I hated?" He turned to look at me. "You said there was a passage about loneliness that was beautiful." I went back and read it again. You were right. It was the admission hung in the air between us. It was an apology, an olive branch, a white flag. It was more than I had ever expected from him. "I just thought the author understood," I said, my voice quiet. "What it feels like to be on the outside. I know what that feels like," he said, and his voice was raw, stripped of all its usual bravado. "I come into this book club, and everyone here has degrees in literature. They're all writers or professors. I'm a carpenter. I build houses. I feel like I have to fight for my right to have an opinion. So I come in loud. I come in strong. It's armor. The confession was a key, unlocking the last of my misconceptions about him. The arrogance, the aggression, it was all a shield, a defense against an insecurity I'd been too busy being intimidated by to ever see. The strong, silent type was not so strong, and not so silent, it turned out. He was just afraid. Like me. "I thought you just hated me," I confessed in turn, the words tasting strange and liberating on my tongue. He let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure surprise. "Hated you? God, no. I was impressed by you. You're the quietest person in the room, but when you speak, you actually have something to say. Everyone else is just trying to sound smart. You are smart. It's terrifying." My world tilted again. Terrifying. He found me terrifying. The thought was so ludicrous, so utterly contrary to my own self-perception, that I had to laugh. A real, genuine laugh. He smiled, a true, wide smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "What's so funny? I thought you were the terrifying one," I said. The giant who was going to crush my flimsy arguments with his bare hands. We looked at each other then, in the flickering firelight, two men who had completely and utterly misjudged one another. The space between us was no longer a chasm. It was a bridge, and I felt a powerful, undeniable urge to cross it. The fire was dying down, the room growing colder. Neither of us made a move to leave. The silence that fell between us now was not awkward or tense. It was full. It was charged with everything that had just been said, and everything that was still unsaid. "We should probably get some sleep," I said eventually, though it was the last thing I wanted. "Yeah," he said, but he didn't move. He just kept looking at me, his blue eyes searching my face in the dim light. "Leo," he said my name. I think it was the first time he'd ever used it. It sounded different in his voice. Solid. Real. What if he started and stopped? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I now recognized as one of nervousness, not frustration. "What if I don't want to sleep on the floor tonight?" My breath caught in my throat. The air crackled. The world narrowed to the space of the hearth rug, to the look in his eyes, to the frantic, hopeful beating of my own heart. The daybed in the study was narrow. It was not built for two. But as we lay facing each other in the cold, absolute darkness of the small room, it felt like the only place in the universe. We were squeezed together, my back against the wall of books, his large frame a warm, solid presence in front of me. Our legs were tangled, our faces inches apart. I could feel the heat of his body, the soft puff of his breath on my cheek. Neither of us spoke. Words felt clumsy, inadequate for the electric tension that hummed between us. My mind, usually a chaotic storm of overthinking, was blessedly, miraculously quiet. There was only sensation. The rough texture of his stubble against my hand as I lifted it to cup his jaw. The surprising softness of his hair as my fingers threaded through it. The solid, steady beat of his heart, which I could feel through his chest, pressed against mine. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I did not. I met him halfway. His lips were tentative at first, a soft, questioning pressure against mine. It was not a kiss of passion, but of discovery. It was a question, asked in a language older than words. "Is this okay? Do you feel this too?" My answer was to deepen the kiss, to open myself up to the warmth that was spreading through my veins like wildfire. It was slow, and it was honest. It tasted of wood smoke and vulnerability and a longing so profound it ached. All the anxiety, all the fear, all the lonely years I'd spent hiding in my quiet, ordered world melted away in the heat of that single, transformative moment. I was not an archivist preserving the past. I was not an observer on the sidelines of life. I was here. I was present. And I was kissing a man I had once thought was my antagonist, discovering that he was, in fact, the one I had been waiting for all along. The morning came too soon, heralded not by sunlight, but by a sudden, jarring flicker of electricity. The desk lamp blinked on, flooding our small, dark world with harsh, unforgiving light. We broke apart, blinking like creatures of the night caught in a sudden glare. The spell was shattered. The intimacy of the darkness evaporated in the sterile hum of the awakened house. I could hear voices from the hallway, the sound of a coffee maker starting up. The world was back, and it had intruded upon our fragile, nascent reality. Julian sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the daybed. He did not look at me. He ran a hand over his face, his back a rigid wall of muscle. The vulnerability of the night was gone, replaced by a tense, unreadable silence. I should go check on things, he said, his voice rough. He stood up, pulling on his discarded jeans and sweater with quick, jerky movements. My own heart, which had been soaring moments before, plummeted into the icy depths of my stomach. A familiar, sickening dread began to creep in. I sat up, clutching the blanket to my chest, a sudden and desperate need for a barrier between us. "Julian," I said, my voice small. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob, but he still wouldn't look at me. "The snowplows will have been through. I should probably try to get home." And then he was gone. I was left alone in the suddenly too bright room, the indentation of his body still warm on the mattress beside me. The silence he left behind was a screaming void. It was a confirmation of my deepest, most ingrained fear, that I was too much or not enough. That any moment of connection was a fleeting illusion, a mistake that would be rectified in the cold light of day. My mind, my old enemy, kicked into high gear. It was a spiral of self-recrimination. It was the storm, cabin fever, a moment of weakness. He regrets it. He's embarrassed. He thinks you're pathetic. He's running away. The thoughts were a vicious, relentless assault. I got dressed in a daze, my movements stiff and robotic. I joined the others in the kitchen, forcing a smile, making small talk about the snow. Julian was there, sipping coffee, talking to our host. He glanced at me once, a quick, fleeting look that I couldn't decipher, before turning away. The chasm between us was back, wider and deeper than ever before. Within an hour, the exodus began. People exchanged grateful goodbyes and ventured out into the bright, transformed world. I said my own thank yous, my voice sounding hollow and strange to my own ears. I saw Julian pulling on his boots by the front door. I thought for one wild, hopeful second that he would wait for me, that he would say something, anything. He just gave a general wave to the room. "See you all at the next meeting," he said, his voice back to its usual confident boom. And then he walked out the door without a backward glance. I watched him go from the window, his broad shoulders disappearing down the snow-cleared street. My solitude, which had once been a comfortable companion, returned as a bitter, mocking ghost. It wrapped its cold arms around me, whispering, "I told you so. This is where you belong." Alone. The echo in my apartment had never been so loud. The week that followed was a special kind of hell. Every waking moment was spent replaying the night in the study, dissecting every word, every touch, searching for the exact moment I had made my fatal mistake. The memory of the kiss was a bittersweet torture. It was the most real thing I had felt in years, and it had been followed by the most profound and painful silence. I checked my phone obsessively, 100 times a day. Each time, the blank screen was a fresh rejection. No call, no text, nothing. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound. It was an active, malevolent presence. It was a statement. What happened between us meant nothing to me. My routine, my old sanctuary, offered no comfort. The walk to the library felt pointless. The ordered silence of the archives felt like a tomb. I had tasted connection, and now my ordinary life felt like a bland, colorless substitute. Julian had disrupted everything, not by his presence, but by his sudden, total absence. The next book club meeting was on Tuesday. Monday night, I decided I couldn't go. I couldn't face him. I couldn't sit in that room and pretend that my heart wasn't a shattered mess on the floor. I would email Clara and make up an excuse. A sudden flu, a family emergency, a lie to protect the fragile remnants of my pride. I was typing the email, the words feeling false and cowardly on screen, when there was a knock on my apartment door. My heart stopped. No one ever knocked on my door. My world was by appointment only. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The knock came again, louder this time. Firm, insistent. With a sense of dreamlike dread, I stood up and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. It was him, Julian, standing in the sterile, fluorescent light of my apartment hallway. He looked wrecked. His hair was a mess. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. He looked nervous. He looked as lost as I felt. I opened the door. We just stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between us, thick with a week's worth of unspoken fear and regret. He was holding something. A book. I recognized the worn cover immediately. It was the novel from our first meeting, the one we had argued about. "Hi," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its usual confidence. "Hi." I managed to reply, my own voice a dry whisper. "Can I?" He gestured vaguely towards the inside of my apartment. "Can we talk?" I stepped back, holding the door open. He walked in, his large frame seeming to shrink the space of my small living room. He didn't sit. He just stood in the middle of the rug, turning the book over and over in his hands. "I'm an idiot," he said, not looking at me. "I'm a coward." I closed the door, my heart beating a painful, hopeful tattoo against my ribs. "I panicked," he continued, his eyes fixed on the book in his hands. "That morning, the lights came on, and suddenly it was all real. And it was more than I was ready for. What I felt with you. I've never felt that before. Not with anyone. And it scared the hell out of me." He finally looked up, and his blue eyes were filled with a desperate, pleading vulnerability. "My whole life, when things get real, I run. It's my default setting. It's stupid, and it's destructive, and I'm so sorry, Leo. I am so sorry for walking away. This past week has been agony." The silence. I just kept thinking I'd ruined the one good thing that's happened to me in years. Every word was a balm on my bruised and battered heart. The story my anxiety had written, the one where he was dismissive and full of regret, was a fiction. The truth was Messier, more human. The truth was that he had been just as scared as I was. "I thought you regretted it." I confessed, my voice thick with emotion. "I thought it was a mistake." "No," he said, taking a step closer. "No, God, no. The only mistake was me leaving." He stopped in front of me, so close I could feel the warmth of his body, smell the cold night air clinging to his jacket. It was the realest thing. We stood there, breathing the same air, finally speaking the same language. The language of fear, and of a longing that was stronger than the fear. He lifted the hand that wasn't holding the book and gently touched my face, his thumb stroking my cheek. The contact was electric, just as it had been that first time, but now there was no panic. There was only a profound sense of coming home. "I don't want to just see you at book club, Leo," he said, his voice a low, earnest murmur. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single key on a simple metal ring. He pressed it into my palm. "This is for my place. So you always know that you can come over. So I'm not going to run again." It was more than a key. It was a promise. It was an anchor. It was a tangible symbol that the fear would not win. Not this time. I closed my fingers around the cool metal, the serrated edges biting into my skin. A tear I hadn't realized I was holding back slipped down my cheek. He wiped it away with his thumb. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice soft, hesitant. "Can I kiss you and not run away this time?" I didn't answer with words. I leaned in and showed him. The quiet of my apartment is different now. It is no longer the sound of emptiness, but the sound of peace. It's the silence of two people reading in the same bed, our legs tangled together under the covers. It's the gentle clink of coffee mugs in the early morning light. It's a comfortable, shared silence, full of unspoken understanding. Julian's presence, which once felt like an invasion, has become the architecture of my new life. His heavy work boots by the door, his ridiculously large coffee mug next to my delicate teacup on the counter, the scent of sawdust, and his soap that lingers on my pillows. These are the details of my new routine, a routine I never could have imagined, and one I now cannot imagine living without. We still go to book club. He still argues his points with a passion that fills the room. But now, when he speaks, I don't hear arrogance. I hear the carpenter who is insecure about his lack of a degree, fighting for his place at the table. And sometimes, in the middle of a heated debate, he'll catch my eye across the room, and the corner of his mouth will lift in that small, secret smile that is just for me. And in that moment, the rest of the world fades away. I went to a book club, searching for a way to fill the silence. I thought I was looking for conversation about plot and prose. I thought my story was already written, a quiet, solitary tale bound in worn leather. But Julian was the plot twist I never saw coming. He was the loud, unexpected, beautiful chapter that changed everything. He disrupted my carefully ordered narrative and gave me a better story. A love story. Our story. And for the first time, my life feels like a book I can't wait to see how it ends. It's funny how a single decision, a single moment can change the entire trajectory of your life. For me, it was joining that book club. For you, maybe it was something else entirely. Have you ever had a moment where you completely misjudged someone, only to find out they were exactly what you needed? Let me know your story in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing for more tales of unexpected connection and the quiet moments that change our lives forever.